What's going on, Packers fans? Aaron Nagler here with Cheesehead TV, and I'm joined by my good buddy, Andy Herman, to talk some football on the precipice of the day when the 53-man roster will be selected, the initial 53, as they like to say. Andy, how the hell are you, buddy?
I'm doing great. Always a fun time of year. Everyone's got their prognostications of who's going to make the initial 50. It's like filling out your March Madness bracket. So
It's become that, right? It really has. People, everybody's. What's funny though, you know what happened about 5-6 years ago? I stopped doing it for that exact reason. I used to do it every year, like for a decade, and then finally, I'm just like, you know what? Everybody's got a 53-man roster projection. I'll let everyone else handle it. Like at Cheesehead TV, Al does it every year, and I'm happy to let him do it. At some point, it's like paralysis analysis, and you just want to like go and let it all kind of happen. Like Christmas will arrive, we'll open our presents, and it'll be great. But there are precious few people on this planet whose 53 I do pay attention to, and Andy, you are one of them.
Appreciate that.
Every year, you always have a kind of an interesting take, and this year, I loved the idea of keeping 8 wide receivers, if only because it'll melt Twitter's brain. Like some people will love it, some people will hate it. What is your thinking behind the number of wide receivers that Brian might keep?
Yeah, no, my process every year is just to see what will melt Twitter's brain. So no, we're on the same page. So
very good, very good. Excellent.
No, here's where I'm at with everything, right? So like, I think things have changed a little bit with the 16-man practice squad, and more importantly, the ability to play, bring play up from the practice squad and play them 3 times each and those sort of things, right? So I think Brian has made mention of it on multiple occasions. They're looking at this as a 69-man roster. And I think when you start getting to that point, you start thinking a lot more of like, okay, what players do we really not want to lose? What players do we think if we release this player, they have the ability to potentially get claimed? And clearly you can't just go with like, 2 defensive linemen or 2 corners or something. Like you can only call up so many players. So there has to be certain boxes that are checked. But when you start talking about, whether it's 7 or 8 or 6 wide receivers or 4 tight ends or 4 or 5 edge rushers, like those sort of things can be supplemented week in and week out by the addition of practice squad players. So I looked at it as a much more of like, okay, what players have shown me enough that I think if they would potentially be released, they could get claimed, and Green Bay may not want to lose those players. And, for me, it's really tough because I think Lazard, Watkins, Cobb are clearly going to be Rodgers veterans that he wants and is going to throw the ball to a ton. Clearly, Watson and Dobbs aren't going anywhere. I can't imagine Brian giving up, on Amari Rodgers, a 3rd-round pick that they moved up for a season ago, who's actually started to show some signs. And even if they did trade him, it would be pennies on the dollar. Winfrey has been Rodgers' guy all camp, and I can't imagine they're going to Kumaro him the way that they did Jay Kumaro.
I love that you made it a verb. That's great.
Absolutely. And then like Samori Toure becomes the interesting one because he's shown
to
me
the demarcation line, right?
Exactly.
I mean, it absolutely is.
He's shown enough to me where like he had the deep ball, during Saints practice where he caught the 50-yard touchdown to end the practice, and then the 2-point conversion, had the deep ball in family night. It's done well in preseason games. There was a mini camp or a training or a mini camp or an OTA, one of the two, where there's a 2-minute drill where like right away he caught like 3 or 4 passes on the drill. Like he's just been relatively consistent from day one. And, could you cut him and maybe get away with it, or do you lose him and does it really matter? Maybe not, but he'd be the one that to me is interestingly enough that I would just want to keep around and not try to, test fate too much.
Yeah, and that absolutely makes sense. And to your point, the new rules or new-ish rules now regarding the practice squad, the expansion of the practice squad, the ability to bring guys up, hell, the ability to bring guys back from injured reserve, even though they did kind of go backwards in that regard. Now there's once again a limit to the number of guys you can do that per year. But all of those things add up to, I think, to your point, there's a whole lot more malleability now. And more than ever, it's the initial 53 rather than the 53. It is interesting, though, to see you, because you have to make a trade-off somewhere, right? If you're going to keep 8 wide receivers, you got to make trade-offs at other positions. For me, most notably at running back, right? Where you have them just keeping A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones, which 1,000%, that makes a world of sense in the idea that whoever that third back is going to be isn't going to be seeing the field over those guys in any meaningful way unless there is an injury. But that's the key. You get into a game and there's an injury at that position. Now suddenly you've gone from, okay, we've got maybe a third guy to throw in there as part of the rotation to, well, now you got to gut out this week, whatever game that might be. maybe it's week 1 in Minnesota where now all of a sudden that guy has to tote the rock 100% of the time. And I'm not saying that that's like they can't do it and they can't get through it, but that's a pretty significant risk, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think there's some risk there, but to me, it's again, do you feel like Tyler Goodson's going to get claimed on waivers? If you do, then maybe you keep him around and he's shown enough. If not, then you put him and Patrick Taylor and maybe even a Dexter Williams, but at least 2 of those guys on your practice squad, and you call a guy up every single week for the next at least 4 weeks, and then you probably get Kylan Hill back and add him as the third running back on your roster, and you're good to go after that. So I think if you care about Tyler Goodson enough and you don't want to subject him to waivers and you really like what he's put on tape, then by all means you keep him. But I would just be hesitant to make the decision of like, okay, but what if Jones or Dillon get injured? To me, the calculus doesn't change if Goodson's on the roster or the practice squad, because if he's on the roster and Jones or Dillon gets hurt, then you're going to go with either Dillon and Goodson or Jones and Dillon. If you call up Goodson from the practice squad, you're either going to go with Jones and Goodson or Dillon and Goodson, right? So it doesn't change all that much. I get like the perception of it being like, oh, it's scary, there's only 2 running backs. I was actually shocked because I've been talking about this for 2 months and I thought I was going to be cool and suave and be like, I'm the only guy that thought of this. And then now every single person, Demovsky, Ryan Wood, Matt Schneidman, Bill Huber, myself, we all had 2 running backs that made the 53. So it's not cool or risque anymore. It's the status quo. And I'm all bummed out about it, Aaron. But
but there's another place on this 53-man roster projection from Andy Herman that I found interesting. And it's not really, I mean, it's not a, something totally outside the box or anything like that, but I did find it interesting that you put Jonathan Garvin on the practice squad and kept Tipa over him. What's your thinking there? I mean, I understand, I probably agree in the sense that Tipa is, to me, probably a more complete guy, surprisingly, because I thought for sure he'd be run over in the running game, and he is pretty much I'm not going to say prove those fears unfounded, but he's played a hell of a lot better in that regard than I would have ever expected. But what was your thinking there? Because to me, with the snaps that we saw Garvin give them last year, is it just a sense of like you think Tipa's had a better camp, or is it just more versatility with that player?
Yeah, there's a couple things here. Let me pull back the curtain a bit. I can pretend that I kind of know other positions. I have no idea at edge rusher 4, 5, 6, like how they're going to differentiate these 4 edge rushers behind Enigbare and then obviously Gary and Preston. I think is going to be one of the most interesting, because at different parts of training camp, I would have been like, okay, Tipa's a lock, or Garvin's a lock, or Hamilton's a lock, or even Kobe Jones had the run where he got reps with the one.
Bit. He had like 2 or 3 days, right?
Like, okay, he's like at every, and then all of them quieted down to some capacity at all different times as well. The where I went here, and this is where I kind of have the same view with running back as I do with edge rusher. To me, you could cut all 4 of these guys, and at minimum, I think you're getting 3 of them back on the practice squad. I don't think any of them are getting claimed. Maybe one of them does, but I think you can, release them, get guys back, probably keep 4 initially, and then, elevate a guy on game day if you absolutely need to. But that's where I kind of came out on it. And the reason I went with Tipa is I feel like he's just been the most consistent player going back to last season, through training camp, through preseason, OTAs, etc. It's not always flashy. It's not always sexy. He's a bit undersized, but he's been the most consistent. And I think he might have the most value on teams of the 4 as well. I go back to Jonathan Garvin. Not that this, again, I always preface this, it's not the be all end all, but I had Garvin as my lowest rated Packer a season ago. I didn't think his tape was that good. I actually was semi excited about him coming off his rookie season on a couple flash plays he had on tape. Then last year, I thought he really struggled. And then he had the OTAs and mini camps that were non-mandatory that he didn't attend. Maybe he had a phenomenal reason. I don't know. But like you want to see players like that at those events. And then I just didn't think he had a good enough camp to maybe make up for all of that. So would not shock me. I think everyone else had Garvin on their 53. So he's definitely well within the realm of conversation there. But I think that is probably the one I'm going to be most interested in tomorrow as we look at the edge rushers and see who they ultimately kept. Because if you told me they kept 4 or 6, or they claimed a guy or traded for a guy like that's the position that I think is most interesting.
I think it's the one that could potentially, I mean, you never really know, but could potentially see the most action all year long, simply because of what you're talking about. Getting back over to the offensive side of the ball, found it interesting you kept Caleb Jones. Is it just a question of big man look good and you're afraid of letting an athletic tackle hit even the potential of the waiver wire?
Yeah, I think, Rasheed Walker, same thing, right? I think, Green Bay's been pretty darn good at finding offensive linemen everywhere, undrafted, late round picks and, developing them and making them into decent players. So, it's maybe a thing where like if they lose those guys, maybe they just don't care. And they're like, we can find another Caleb Jones and Rasheed Walker next year and we're not going to lose any sleep over it. But like, I think for most teams, if you get guys that look that good at the offensive line position as developmental prospects, you're usually pretty hesitant to move on. Usually want to see what you can get out of them as a ceiling. Now, maybe this is a bit aggressive, but like if you told me Caleb Jones was the next, Yash Nyman, where he put in 2-3 years on the practice squad and then developed into a pretty solid swing tackle, I think that's well within the realm of possibility. And freaking Rasheed Walker, man, like he didn't get any team reps or anything. You battled injuries, got some hard coaching. He gets one game, about 40 snaps in one game to say like, go out and show what you can do. I thought he was fantastic in that game. I know it's against second and third stringers, whatever, but like, I don't think you could have asked him to do anything more. And again, I'm just hesitant to give, and listen, everyone came out of the draft weekend and is like, man, the Packers got a steal in Rasheed Walker in the 7th round. What that means, who knows, right? But like, I know a lot of people were excited about that pick. I think he gets one opportunity to go in a game, looks great. And then I just think releasing him after that and subjecting him to waivers and maybe losing him, I don't know. Again, I think you can, get by with other players released at other positions that are unlikely to get claimed. Jones and Walker are likely to get claimed at a position that is always hard for teams to find.
No doubt. I mean, you look at across the league, tackle play, offensive line play in general, I think that's a safe bet, especially with, like you say, it's funny because sometimes you'll hear Brian talk about, he's mentioned it a couple summers now, where that final preseason game can really mean a lot as far as whatever your calling card is as a player, not just for the Packers, but then league wide. If you're a scout or a personnel guy, yeah, you're probably going back and looking at those first couple games, but you're most likely reaching for the most recent game as far as like, okay, what's this kid done? And like you said, he put on a show. I thought he looked really good in that game.
No, totally agreed. And I think the other thing too is that like we always think that like, all right, all 32 teams are vying for the same shot at a Super Bowl. Like there's a good chunk of teams that are looking to get the, just find talent and unearth talent at this point. They're not trying to win Super Bowls. They want to build up the base, and finding guys like Rasheed Walker or Caleb Jones that they can get off of weight, especially those guys that are really low on the waiver priority. Like they're going to be looking for guys exactly like that, developmental prospects that could be good 2-3 years down the road. And again, if I'm Green Bay, I'd just maybe be hesitant to do that.
I can't believe you let go of my guy, Innis Gaines, and your guy, Kabion Ento. What is this world coming to, man?
I know it's a hard world. I honestly probably maybe would have kept Gaines had it not been for the most recent injury, but with another hamstring injury, it just feels like he's probably going to be one of those guys that's released with an injury designation, and those always just get messy and they never end up back on the team. And hopefully I'm wrong. I think he's a really fun player. And I'd love to see him on the team in some capacity, or maybe they just IR him and keep him for the year and bring him back next year. We'll see. But, I think that's the reasoning there. And then I just think Ento, like at this point, I think this is his 3rd training camp now, where he had an opportunity.
At some point, it's like if it was going to flip the switch, it was going to happen.
Yeah, and listen, he had probably the play of training camp with a ridiculous leaping one-handed interception.
Right.
Like just play. No, he's good for like 1 or 2 of those every training camp that makes you go, man, if he could just put it all together. But not a great special teams guy, not a great tackler. He's an okay cover guy, phenomenal ball skills for a corner, but that only gets you so far. I just think, like you said, at this point, if it hasn't completely flipped the switch, I just don't see it happening.
What about you talk about these guys that probably out the door in the secondary, but what about this Abernathy kid? I mean, you talk about a guy who I think we talked about him last week, but I can't stop watching him. He is so physical and so decisive. Do you think obviously so much can play out as far as claims and trades and cuts and what have you, but man, I really think he's got a chance to help this team and be a pretty solid depth piece. What do you think?
Yeah, the last 3 that I really struggled with were Heflin, Tyler Goodson, and Abernathy were the 3 that like I really didn't want to release and wanted to keep in some capacity. Like he just feels like, I know they were in different situations. I know Chris Barnes was like an undrafted guy for them right out the gate, and they didn't sign him midway. But he just sort of feels like this season's Chris Barnes, where like you didn't really see anything coming out of the guy, but like you go back and watch it and you're just like, man, there is something there. And he had all the physical tools coming out, ridiculous athletic profile, and for whatever reason hadn't clicked up until this point. I mean, man, give the scouting staff a ton of credit for just finding guys like this. And who knows, maybe he's on the practice squad, maybe he doesn't make the roster at all, but like an impressive enough 3 preseason games that it makes you turn your head and go like, man, this scouting staff knows how to find guys. And he's one of those guys. I would not be shocked at all if he was on a 53-man roster, whether it's Green Bay or another team come the opening week.
What do you think of the release of Ty Summers? Did that surprise you at all? I know some people thought it was a kind of a foregone conclusion, which I get because of the additions they've made at the position of inside backer, etc. But for a team that has struggled mightily at special teams, I know Ty's not a world beater, but he has been a core team guy. Did that surprise you at all, or was it pretty much a foregone conclusion?
Yeah, don't mean to seem like a jerk to Ty Summers here, but I was surprised he didn't get released on the 85, and then I was surprised he didn't get released on the 80. And just the reason being is that, I know he actually played the most special team snaps of any Packer this preseason, which gives, I think, sort of the indicator of like, okay, he's a core special teams guy, but in a lot of those practices, he was not with the ones in the core special teams like he had been in the past. And he'd been running as the number 6 inside linebacker, behind even Ray Wilborn. And of course, you had all the new, Chris Barnes is playing great, and McDuffie looks way better. You've got Quay Walker in there. So, I just think that his time at inside linebacker was, he's had his opportunity to show himself, sort of like the same KB Nento thing, right? He's had opportunities. You've seen him at linebacker, you've seen him at special teams. I didn't see anything new or exciting out of him this year. And while he has a ton of special team snaps on his resume, I think Rich Bisaccia wanted to go in a different direction, maybe somebody a bit more physical on that spot. So didn't come as a surprise to me. Hope he catches on somewhere. Obviously he was a really great Packer, consummate professional, those sort of things. So you hope he catches on, but that definitely did not surprise me at this point.
Speaking of special teams, I'm not going to ask if we're nervous about Mason Crosby yet, because we'll have our answer by tomorrow. So we'll just leave that up to the gods. But how confident are you, or how comfortable would you be if the Packers had to go roll out Ahmed out there? Because he's seemingly kicked pretty damn well from the moment he's become a Packer.
The very first time I saw him kick a ball, I was like, obviously going from Burkic to Ahmed, I'm like, oh, that is a lot different. Like it just came off of his foot much cleaner, much more accurately. There was a different sound to it. Like
totally agree.
It felt a lot different. Not that that's saying a ton, right? Like Burkic wasn't that great, but like you felt like they like, okay, they actually have somebody here. Burkic never felt that way. He didn't have long kickoffs. He wasn't accurate on his field goals. It just never felt like there was anything there. Ahmed is totally different. And I tweeted, I don't think this is going to happen. I don't hope that this is going to happen. But like, if you said there was like something shocking tomorrow that happened, what I would like potentially say is like, okay, maybe they just decided to move on from Crosby with an injury designation and keep Ahmed. But to go back to your original question, how confident I would be, Aaron, I'm not confident in anything this special teams does at all. I don't care if Mason Crosby's out there. I don't care if they bring back Chris Jackie and Ryan Longwell and every other kicker. Like there is nothing that will give me any confidence in the special teams until I see them go out for a season and prove that they know how to play special teams.
You know what? That is totally fair. There is no there's no response to that other than I totally get it, man. Yep. I totally get it. I'm right there with you. I said in my gut reactions after the last preseason game, well, certainly looks like it's another season of holding your breath every single time any of the special teams units are out there.
You know what I said a year ago at this time? You know what I said? I said, there's no way special teams could possibly get worse. I said that a year ago at the time. I'm like, there's no way special teams could possibly get worse. And they said, hold my beer, hold all the beer, hold all the beer.
All the beers.
Hold all the beers. We will show you. And so I'm not even going to utter anything.
Andy, we're not going to say that this year, are we?
No, we're not going to say it this year.
We know we've learned if there's a franchise that can consistently find the bottom and then exceed it and go through it and just plow under it, it's the Green Bay Packers and special teams. All right.
Indeed.
Andy, I can't thank you enough for the time. Make sure you check out all his work with Pack a Day Podcast over there at Packer Report. The man covers the Green Bay Packers like a blanket. Andy, I can't thank you enough, man.
I appreciate it as well.